When you buy a cross-stitch kit, it'll come with everything you need. But if you've bought a digital pattern, it will only come with a PDF, and you'll need to kit up that pattern on your own by buying all the other supplies you need. This video will cover which floss to buy and how much you need, how to cut and prepare your fabric, and if you stick around to the end, you'll get a bonus tip on how to organize your supplies. The first thing you'll do is determine what floss and fabric you need for your project. Embroidery floss is sold by skeins. Most of the time, one skein of floss will be much more than you need for a single project. Patterns usually have a key that lists all of the colors that are used in the project. Here you can see which colors are used, the brand and the number of those colors, as well as the name, although these names are often unofficial, so they might vary across different projects for the same color. Then the number of strands you'll use for this stitch, and the number of stitches in this color. Sometimes with larger projects, they'll have an additional column that represents the number of skeins you need. However, for a smaller project like this, all of the colors are going to be much less than one full skein, so you will be safe. After that, you take the list and compare to the floss that you have. For example, I need 3766. I look through my box and find that I also need 3846 and 3844. In my case, I have everything I need and I don't have to go to the store. Now that you've got your floss, let's talk fabric. First, you'll need to decide what count fabric you're going to work with. The most common forms of Aida are going to be 14, 16, and 18 count. Sometimes your pattern will have a recommendation. For example, this one says it was measured for 16 count Aida fabric. But if it doesn't, you can remember that 14 count Aida will be a much larger finished piece than something on 18 count. After you've decided on the count, you can pick your color. White Aida is always going to be the easiest to find, but you could use black Aida to really make a pattern pop, or hand-dyed or printed fabric for these really beautiful colors. Once you have your fabric, we need to get it ready to stitch. You'll likely need to cut it down because it's a little bit big. The amount of fabric you need will depend a lot on your project. First, is your project a full coverage project? Those are going to be the easiest. You simply divide the number of stitches by the count of your Aida and add 4 in each direction so that you have enough fabric for the finishing of that piece. Partial coverage projects like this one are a little bit trickier, and you'll need to consider how you plan to finish the project. If you want to display your project in a hoop, you'll need to consider the largest side of the design and divide that by the thread count. In this case, it would be about 2.8 inches. However, because hoops are circular and patterns are maybe rectangles, this about 3 inches is going to be too large to fit into a 3-inch hoop. So in this case, I would use a 4-inch hoop, and then I would need to add 4 additional inches in order to actually finish the project. Another way you might finish it is in a frame. In this case, you'll need to consider what frame size will look nice for the image you're working on. Again, let's look at our approximately 3-inch by 2-inch project. That might look nice in a 5 by 3 frame. In this case, you'll take the dimensions of that frame and add 4 inches to each side so that you have enough fabric to easily frame it. Finally, you might finish your project in a custom mat or even just on its own. In this case, I would add 1 inch to the base measurements for margins around the project, and then an additional 2 inches or 3 on each side to make sure that you have that extra fabric to finish the project in the back. If we were working on a project for display within a 4-inch hoop, we would want to cut a 6 to 8-inch square. For beginners, I always recommend additional space. It is better to have too much fabric. I like to mark my lines with a heat erasable or water soluble pen, just so that it's a little bit easier to keep track of what I'm doing. Okay, so that is as far as I need to go. I personally use a rotary cutter. I find it a little bit easier, but you could also use just normal sharp fabric scissors. When you cut, you should use the lines of the Ada to line up very carefully. Cutting along these lines will help reduce fraying in your project later on. And then we have our beautiful 8-inch by 8-inch square. What's great about this is you can also use a larger hoop while you're working on it so you have more space for your needle and all of that. You don't have to worry about perfect hoop placement. The simplest method to protect your edges is to use masking tape. Masking tape or painter's tape on the edge is a really great way to protect your fabric. Mine is excessively large, but it'll work just fine. Simply line it up close to the edge, smooth it down, flip over, smooth again. Obviously, since mine is big, it requires a pretty large extra edge, but we already accommodated that, so it should be fine. The one risk with using masking tape is that it might discolor your fabric over time, especially if you're working on a large project that's going to take a long time. So you want to be careful, only use this if you have plenty of space on your edges and you won't have any risk of seeing discoloration affecting anything that's going to be within the visible parts of your finished project. So another option is to sew the edge. Using a sewing machine or a serger, you can do a zigzag stitch, or you can even do a whip stitch by hand. For the whip stitch, you can totally use a knot. I like to use the Ada holes as a guide and go about every 2 squares. You ever wish you could just speed up something like you can in a video in real life? Obviously, that takes a lot longer than the tape method, so I'm a fan of tape, but it's also a lot less intrusive and it will work just as well. So now you have a pile of floss, some nicely sized fabric, and your pattern. How do you keep this from becoming a tangled mess? One option is to put everything into project bags. You can get these in all sorts of different sizes, and some folks will even just use a Ziploc bag. Collect all of the supplies that you've prepared and place them into that project bag. Don't forget to add your hoop, your embroidery scissors, and why don't you throw a needle minder in there too? I even like to fold my pattern and sneak it into that clear front so that I'm able to reference it while stitching. For really big projects, even a project bag can get messy, so I'll use a plastic organizer. These bins keep all of my threads and my scissors neatly organized so it's easy to find throughout the long project. Those are my 2 favorite ways of organizing projects. What about you? Let me know in the comments how you keep your projects neat.